Welcome, everyone, to the Revolution in the 21st Century Convention. It is so good to have you all back. We have been hopping over the day with, I think, 500 people now tuning in throughout the day, £6,000 in donations, many of you giving regularly now to support this project, support this work. Really, really appreciate it. People are now trickling in into this live event after the last few. We've had some great discussions today, from how social movements can capture media attention to how we can use assemblies to rebuild a democracy, really opening up the sphere. We had Kofi Klou come in from Ghana to give us a bit of a talk on internationalist solidarity, building up the global majority in revolution. Such an inspiring array of people. If you haven't had a chance to tune into all the sessions, I really recommend hopping on Zoom events and going onto the sessions tab. You can see everything that's happened so far and get inspired and get involved. This session is on media, power, and resistance. So in a way, we are trying to create our own alternative media here by running this convention, by providing ways for revolutionary speakers who are committed to democratic and nonviolent social change across the world to take action, to have a platform. I'm very happily joined live with Matt Kennard, one of the founders of the Declassified UK, fantastic investigative media outlet. And I will also be playing now a clip from the legendary Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize winning author, general champion of our movement. He's just recently been to visit Roger Hallam in prison, who is one of my fellow co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, also helped set up this group, Revolution in the 21st Century. He was hoping to join the convention today, but sadly, the prison authorities came into his cell earlier and cut him off from making a phone call. This is just a continued line of repression against Roger. They've confiscated his manuscripts on books. They've cut off his phone calls. We're really hoping he'll be released soon and can be back out to challenge the media establishment as we know it. We just had a fantastic session with Claire Farrell, Bart Van Es, and Peter Tatchell, where they really spoke about Roger's interview with Nick Robinson on the BBC and how he challenged consistently this kind of establishment thinking. The cult of the BBC is kind of, thinking on these topics and reframing it entirely. So it's really exciting to be bringing all of this together. I will kick off with this clip from Chris to help as a provocation, and I'll pass over to Matt, and hopefully we have a couple of speakers joining in on the Zoom events. Hands up, it's our first time doing Zoom events. There might be some live troubles with speakers joining in. We found out a few countries are banned from hosting Zoom events, sadly, but either way, we'll keep the discussion going and see what happens. And you're very welcome to participate. The 100 or so of you that are watching live through the Q&A function to chat to Matt. You can also raise your hand and come into this Zoom room with us to ask a question. You'd be super welcome to be part of this conversation. So with all that being said, I'll pass over to Chris for 10 minutes to give his introduction to this conversation. Sadly, he's not able to be here live, although very supportive because he's doing an event this evening in Los Angeles.
Hi, my name is Chris Hedges. I'm a former foreign correspondent for the New York Times. Spent 20 years overseas. Left the New York Times. I was the Middle East bureau chief when I denounced the war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, and was given a formal written reprimand. That thrust me into the world of alternative media. I'm pleased to be here with Roger and Matt Kennard and others. And I would join you virtually, but I'm speaking tonight in Los Angeles on my new book on the genocide. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happened to the media, because I'm old enough to remember what it was and what it's become. The media when I worked for instance, the New York Times, it sought to reach a very broad audience. The power of the New York Times was never in its numbers. It had a circulation of about 2.2 million. It was in the fact that it set the agenda. So, for instance, when I was covering the war in Bosnia, when I was in Central America, when I was in the former Yugoslavia, the Middle East, anywhere else, the network producers would read what I wrote in the morning in the New York Times and then send their correspondents out to do it. That was the power of the Times. All of that has now been shattered. The old media model of attempting to reach a broad audience with just a few networks, we had 3 major networks in the United States, not including CNN, which was a latecomer, and then public television. But anyway, they were small in number. So with the rise of the internet, and the ability on the internet to silo demographics, to cater to a particular demographic, the old media landscape disintegrated. And what took its place were these much narrower media entities that catered to a specific group. So, for instance, the New York Times, where I used to work, 90+% of the people who read the New York Times identify as registered Democrats. I don't have the exact number, but the same is true for MSNBC. And then the opposite would be Fox News, Breitbart, where people cater to Trump supporting Republicans. They're not traditional Republicans, of course. The traditional Republicans have migrated to the Democratic Party, the Liz Cheneys, the Mitt Romneys, to form essentially the old ruling class. It's interesting that the Democratic Party is a corpse. It's collapsed. It has approved. The latest NBC News poll shows that it has a 27% approval rating. And that siloing created a new form of journalism, whereby you catered to that demographic. You told that demographic what they wanted to hear, which makes commercial sense. But of course, it's an anathema to journalism. It corroded the integrity of journalism when I won't go into the many problems of an elitist publication like the New York Times had to begin with, but things are much worse. And you don't pay for it. So for instance, with the first administration of Trump and the decline of newsprint, you saw the rise of digital subscriptions, but digital subscribers they don't pay as much. It's much more fickle. They will cancel their subscriptions. And the New York Times knew from polling that a huge percentage of their digital subscribers subscribed because they hate Trump. And that's where you got 2 years of the mythology of Russiagate, the idea that Trump was a Russian asset. And the New York Times, like the Washington Post, like other media entities that catered to that Democratic Party elite or those Democratic Party supporters, didn't pay a price for that fiction because it's what they wanted to hear. It's how you get. There was a podcast called The Caliphate, which turned out to be inspired by an imposter who claimed he was a member of ISIS. He never was. Again, you don't pay a price. As long as you're attacking those targets that your demographic wants attacked. And the same was true, of course, with Fox News. The whole fiction of white genocide in South Africa and Trump fast-tracking the immigration of white Afrikaners, white South Africans, and then essentially deporting and blocking people of color. This is all justified by another group in the siloed media. The danger with that is that by siloing the media like that, by placing people within echo chambers where they only hear what they want to hear, or they're only fed what they want to be fed, is you create a wider and wider divide. And I would argue that both sections of the media are essentially non-reality based. The failure on the part of the Democratic Party in the United States to take responsibility for NAFTA, the trade deals, the austerity programs. After the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994, we saw 30 million, it's estimated, mass layoffs, which contributed, of course, to the rise of a demagogue like Trump. But the Democratic Party has never owned its responsibility. This was done, of course, under the Clinton administration, a Democratic administration. They've never owned that, much less addressed that reality. They pretend it doesn't exist. All the postmortems after the latest Trump victory are about messaging, that we didn't have the right messaging. We didn't reach out to young men, especially young white men. But it shows how disconnected they are. Well, the same is true, of course, in the cult party that is centered now around Trump, which is non-reality based. And that's what happens in disintegrating societies, that essentially you retreat into illusion. And I wrote a book called Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle, because it is all now about spectacle. You have Trump is about to have his military parade, which, not accidentally is going to take place on his birthday and cost $45 million. But at the same time, if you looked at the last Democratic convention, you had a vapid, issueless candidate who, running a celebrity-driven campaign. It was empty. There was nothing there. Again, it was all spectacle. How does that affect us as people who care about the disintegration of the climate? Well, immensely, because these two non-reality-based systems, the one is a climate denial, and the other, revolving around these democratic elites, is that we can fix it. That whether it's engineering feats or capturing carbon or whatever it is, but they're both non-reality-based belief systems that don't acknowledge the accelerating ecocide that is taking place. This means that for those of us who seek to impart this information about what's happening to our climate and the imperative of standing up to prevent mass extinction, we're never going to be able to use traditional media entities in order to communicate the reality of climate change. It's all going to come out of alternative media systems, which will be increasingly attacked with algorithms and marginalized. One of the things I think Roger has right is that probably as we mount this campaign, it's going to have to be done person to person. That there's going to have to be that old kind of town hall kind of contact as the media space begins to be narrower and narrower. And I, of course, have been very outspoken about the genocide in Gaza. I was the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. I'm an Arabic speaker. I spent 7 years in the Middle East, much of that time in Gaza. I have seen how that attempt to fight and speak out about the genocide is not only being silenced, but being criminalized. And that, of course, has a direct parallel with what is happening with climate activists. That's why Roger and the other Just Stop Oil activists were sent to prison and given such absurdly long terms, because the elites on both sides of the spectrum are determined to shut down any narrative, whether that is about the genocide, whether that is about the collapse of the ecosystem that imperils their status and their profit. And that's why I think that Roger has it right, that we have to rebuild structures ourselves, revolutionary structures from the ground up that challenge established power, because established power, if they're not broken, if they're not halted in what's happening, will kill all of us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to Chris Hedges, speaking to us a few days ago in London, just after, having visited the Middle East again, really speaking to all of us here right now, I think, on the importance of building these alternative spaces to have these conversations, participatory spaces, building the alternatives. It's our first time running this convention online like this, but I really hope that it can create something like that. We have the possibility to have thousands of us here in online town halls of a kind, together and connecting. Please do, be part of that here. If you want to put your message in the chat, if you want to react, if you want to be in the lobby, ask a question, please, you are here with us. That being said, the main person with me right now on this screen is Matt Kennard. I wonder, Matt, if you wanted to react to what Chris has just said and maybe say a few words yourself too, that would be great.
Yeah, firstly, just to go on from what you and Chris said, we're entering a very historic moment, and not in a good way, right now with the rise of global fascism. Obviously, climate change, ecocide, the genocide in Gaza, everything does seem to be veering towards a very ugly place. So it is vital to have talks about like this and forums like this, because I feel like what the left and revolutionaries or anyone who wants to see a different path needs now is strategy. So we need to be talking about strategy now. And this is a great start. And obviously, we should do many more. But I would also say that I agree with Chris and yourself that we need to get rid of this notion that we can work within the existing legacy institutions in our societies to enact change. That's a misunderstanding of what those institutions are. Those institutions are set up, and many of them created, to stop change happening. So we need to stop. I said this for many years during the Labour Party, even after Corbyn left, because everyone, when Corbyn was elected, I did kind of think, well, maybe I was wrong about the Labour Party being a vehicle for change. I never thought it was, but actually they were the main reason that he got destroyed. And then afterwards, many people were staying in it, saying, well, we can move the Labour Party left, right, but so much energy was expended within the Labour Party that if it had been used on alternative institutions, building alternatives, we would be much further down the road than we are. So I think this is a very important thing. And I'm talking about political institutions like the Labour Party, but I'm also talking about media institutions, because there's also a whole camp that believes you can do good work within the Guardian or the Times and stuff. No, you can't. I mean, you can do small bits of good work, but in terms of the structural change and the structural exposés that we need, you can't do that. And I would say also that we actually do have quite an exciting alternative media space now in the UK, which is not the most exciting country in the world over the past, well, in my lifetime, but actually is one of the most exciting places for alternative media. And this, I'll just give you an example of that, which is actually quite illustrative. So I released a book in 2023, co-authored with Claire Provost, called Silent Coup: How Corporations Overthrew Democracy, which is very relevant to climate change. Well, in fact, is central to the issue of climate change, because the corporate control is the reason we can't actually take a different path than the one we're on. But anyway, that book, like my previous book, wasn't reviewed in any mainstream media. Still to this day, has never been a single word about that book in the mainstream media. It was published by Bloomsbury. It was a small imprint, Bloomsbury Academic, but still, it got huge amounts of interest. And when my first book came out in 2012 and the paperback came out a few years later, that one didn't sell very well at all, because it wasn't covered in the mainstream, but I had nowhere to go in terms of publicity. I couldn't go to Double Down News or Open Democracy or Declassified UK. They didn't exist. There was no real alternative media space. When Silent Coup came out, I did it all, and it sold well and actually had an impact in terms of the narrative. And that was because the ecosystem had been built, partly because of Corbyn, but also it's carried on and progressed. So that's just one example of how important it is we build alternative institutions, because, as I say, the reason we can't solve the issue of climate change or an ecocide that we're seeing is because corporations control our societies and they control our media. And the Guardian says, well, we're not corporate media, but of course they are. If you look on the Guardian website, they've got a whole section called Guardian Labs, which always makes me laugh, because they call it labs. Like, we'll see if this has a good impact if we allow corporations to write their advertorials on our website. But they have, and they do. One thing the Guardian did do a few years ago was to say we won't take any fossil fuel company money, but they do publish advertorials for HSBC, for example, which is heavily invested in fossil fuels. So the infrastructure of corporate control at the Guardian is basically like the rest of the media, and in some elements worse. So and it's quite interesting that people can understand why, if you live in the Soviet Union, and people in the Soviet Union understood that if they read Pravda, they were getting the state line. Now, why don't we think when we have why do we think we're ever going to get the truth about the corporate dominated society we live in from corporate media? They have an interest structurally in not allowing us to see the truth of corporate control and the different pressure points and the different power centers that enact that control. So what we need to do is build what is happening, as I said, but we need to build more and more alternative media, which is not beholden to state or corporate power, because they're the two major power centers in our society, and they don't care about truth. And when truth exists on a certain level, it goes into society and it gets tainted by those two forces. And in the media, they both, the pressure from the state and the corporation exists. I can also bring some insight from starting Declassified UK as well, because which I'm not part of anymore, but which still does a great work. And you see when you start an alternative media outlet that all the incentives are for you to veer into the sort of liberal consensus type media. So when I say incentives, I'm talking about funding. That's the primary one. So if you want to get funding from liberal foundation industry, they want all the frothy stories. They like scandals, but they won't want ones that structurally show. For example, one example that we did a lot of work on was the relationship between the security state in the UK and BP and Shell. Now, MI6 works effectively as an enforcement arm for BP. And not many people know it, but they're not interested in stories like that. They'll do things like the expenses scandal or something that shows a sort of a temporary scandal, but nothing that will actually reveal the real mechanics of how our society works. And we need that to happen for real change to happen. And the other thing I'll say is the information war is the key to all of this, I believe, because the control of the narrative that the state has and corporations have is why we have a population which is not awake to the threat of climate change yet, anywhere near the degree it should be, and is not awake to the British participation in the Gaza genocide, for example, another one. And they know that, and that's why they clamp down. If that kind of alternative media or structural and expose type of journalism gets anywhere near the mainstream, that's a crisis for them. And we saw that happen with Julian Assange in the UK, right? He was put in Belmarsh prison for 5 years, effectively in solitary confinement, for revealing the mechanics of the US empire and the crimes of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is what you're told journalism should be about. He did it in tandem with The Guardian and other newspapers, and he was still put away. And that's what happens. So we live in a hyper reality where we're told all these things that we have, like freedom of speech, freedom of protest, freedom of media. But when you start pushing the boundaries of what you think is acceptable, you realize that it all dissipates and it all evaporates very quickly. And people like Roger Allen realize are feeling that in a material sense, right? He's in prison for 5 years. I think his sentence was reduced a bit, but for being on a Zoom call. I mean, stuff that you would never expect. And the state doesn't want to have to do that. But if they're pushed hard enough and we take our freedoms too seriously, they will come at us. But I do feel, I haven't got much longer, but I do feel optimistic in a sense that I think that the world has woken up over the Gaza genocide in a way that I've never seen. Like, I do a lot of talks now, and old ladies come up to me who live in Somerset and places, and they've read the Daily Telegraph all their life, and they say, I am shocked by what I've seen over the past nearly 2 years, by what my government has done and supported, because they're seeing what's going on and the horror that has just been constant, and their whole worldview is upended. So that's an opportunity for us, because I don't think that people like that, and I think this is happening on a mass scale because of social media largely, but that kind of realization that you've been lied to all your life, you don't stop at Gaza. You move on to, you start questioning everything, and then that's when we can move that kind of momentum into the climate movement, which is obviously an existential battle that we have. So we need to, and then you start explaining to people, well, actually, the MI6, you think of James Bond and you think of all these great operations against the Soviets or whatever it is. It's a very propagandized institution. But if you say, actually, no, what it is a secret enforcement arm, off the books enforcement arm, the British establishment that works on behalf of corporations like MI6. Obviously, the MI6 overthrew the Iranian democratically elected prime minister in 1953 on behalf of Anglo-Iranian oil, which became BP. So, and then people start. So I think that we need to take advantage of this. And I'll finish with this as well, is that the reason they're so scared of alternative media and truth getting out is because it has a massive change when it happens. So, for example, I've seen that in a very, very real way with the work I've been doing on the British participation in the Gaza genocide, which insanely is basically Declassified and me were the only one, to this day, are the only ones really investigating it. We were a small team. Even when I was there, it was 4 people. I think it's still 4 people. This was work where we talked about the base in Cyprus, RF criteria and its role. We talked about the daily spy flights. We revealed countless things about it. And it had a huge impact in Cyprus. Protests every week. The president on both sides of the Cypriot border had to make statements about it. None of it ever translated to the mainstream media here, which is amazing in itself and telling, but also goes to show that I think if imagine if the resources of the Guardian or the BBC were used to really reveal the truth about corporate control of our BP's control of our state, Shell's control of our state, the British participation in the things would change probably within weeks, if not months. Real system change would happen, and they know that, and that's why they've spent so long capturing those institutions and making sure they don't reveal the truth. But that's an opportunity for us, because if we know that when people are given the information that they need to properly understand society and they're not given that, then that's hopeful. And I also would, sorry, I keep saying I'll finish, but I will finish with this one point, which is that, and I think this is important for all of us to understand, and I don't know strategically how we deal with it. I think building alternative media is the way to deal with it, but even if we're talking of our understanding of the propaganda system that we have in our society, we need to understand that the main way they do propaganda is not active lies, although they do that, but it's not their preferred method. From working at Declassified and before, the main way they do it is propaganda by omission. So if you read a Guardian article or a Telegraph article, the main way that they're brainwashing you is by leaving out information, not giving you wrong information, and you see that all the time. If you talk about, I just mentioned BP and MI6, zero articles that mention BP will ever even talk about their relationship with the British state. And if you had a proper media, that link would be made all the time. One story I did was about Sir John Sawyers, who was head of MI6 from 2009 to 2014. He was the first ambassador to Iraq, special representative appointed by Tony Blair in 2003. The year after he left he left MI6, he joined BP, and he's still there. He's earned millions. He's earned millions on the board of BP. That's never been written about. No, I did a story calculating how much he'd earned, but that kind of story is just, you can't put it in the media. Why? It's crazy. And these journalists don't even there's not even a system of punishment for them, really. You might lose your job further down the line, maybe, but not actively. But there's an obedience to authority. There's an obedience to the state narrative and the corporate narrative, which is just ingrained and is not even they're not even aware of it. They say, well, I can write what I want. But the truth is they can write what they want because their proprietors like what they write. I think we should forget that these institutions, they're done for. They're part of the problem. That goes for Labour, that goes for the Guardian, that goes for the Times, it goes for all of them. And we can build, and we are building alternative institutions, and they are going to be the thing that really changes. And we need to wrest back the narrative, because we live swimming in propaganda, swimming in it. And a lot of it is state, but even more of it is corporations. You know, they're everywhere. They've infested every part of our society. And that book, Silent Coup, was all about the different mechanisms they've used since the Second World War, often using the Bretton Woods institutions to basically, even if you can't see it, to create mechanisms where they can overrule state authority and also infest the states themselves. So even if a state is making a decision, that decision is often on behalf of corporations. So they've tied up the whole game, basically. And we need to, unfortunately, there's not many spaces in our society left where you can talk critically and openly about the real role of corporations. But forums like this, there's many others now on the alternative spectrum coming up, are vital to creating a better world, and a world where we all survive, which I think can come.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Matt, and for Chris Hedges' video call coming in earlier. Really appreciate that. You're getting a lot of love in the chat right now. You might see the emojis coming in, a lot of shock at the suppression that you mentioned, and your book, also the suppression in the mainstream media around that. And I'm really excited to see people in the lobby talking about what are the other alternatives that are out there. This is what this is all about, people. It's like, you know, I'm so inspired to bring us together, over 100, 110 of us right now in the call, just like, how do we build this together? Everything starts with a small group of people. I really learned that in Extinction Rebellion, being 10 people in a room, getting 100,000 on the streets. We are very happily joined now by Rachel Donald, who I think is a real inspiration in building alternative media, Planet Critical. Been following for the last several years. In fact, inspired me partly to run this convention, and lots of the speakers who are here are inspired from Rachel's work. Yeah, Rachel, I'd love to hear, from you on this, on building alternative media, building particularly, social movements. How do we counter this moment? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I'm sorry I'm late. And also, I am in an airport, so there will be background noise from time to time over the tannoy. And I apologize to everyone for that. We'll just do our best to kind of battle through. I think that, right, I'm going to start in a place I didn't think I was going to start. But recently, I sort of had the idea that this age of independent media being quite fractured, and people having their own newsletters and essentially sort of requiring individual subscriptions from people, that's going to crash and burn, right? The cost of living is going up. People are going to want to centralize where they're getting their information from. Could we reinvent the newspaper essentially and make it something whereby you are actively collating really independent analysis, really independent critical thought, and ensuring as well that independent writers going forward have a bit of a supportive base to lean on in one another, and also a dialogue, because I think that's a little bit of what is missing at the moment. We have built a very interesting Anglophone, and that's the only one I can speak of, alternative media system, where there's a lot of new voices coming through and a lot of new kind of takes on what's happening and lots of new ways to understand information. But I think that the next step is going to be a dialogue between those voices, because I certainly don't feel like I'm shouting out into the void, but I have no doubt that my work and my thoughts would be far improved by engaging with other people and pushing that conversation forward all the time, and learning how to integrate our different analyses into an increasingly bigger systemic understanding of what's going on. So I went and I reached out to some people and was like, hey, don't you think that this is going to happen? Like, don't we need to get ready? How about we kind of club together and figure out something new? And that idea barely got off the ground, because if I can tell you one thing, it's that those of us that are, maybe a little bit alternative, we don't really like institutions. We don't really like bureaucracy. And I have to say, not all that good at working together on a small scale. But when it comes to actually like scaling up and scaling out, you then have to deal with all of this kind of admin crap, essentially, which I think is really the main point of inflection that stops people from actually building the new Guardian or the new whatever without a huge amount of money and a huge amount of support. But it also down to us. I think that there is an element of independent media at the moment, and as well in academia, that is quite happy. I think about this a lot with my work. Like throwing stones. We're like, that's shit, that's rubbish, don't like it. I can see the problem with that. Okay, but what are we actually building? And this is why I think these kinds of events are really important to think about what is the next step, because it can't just be deconstruction. Look where that got the fucking postmodernists. We live in a postmodern world that's an absolute nightmare to even talk about. And I think that the left is also responsible for where we've gotten to in this stage of like not having the language to describe what's going on and not being able to find common ground with people. And so we as a community, if I may call everyone that, we are going to have to figure out how to talk to each other and how to also bring people on side. Because whilst, Matt, I agree with like much of your analysis, I think I disagree on this being a sort of like a moral problem. I think most people are just a little bit incompetent. And I don't mean that with any kind of like nastiness. I don't think that the journalists at The Guardian are kind of in on some idea to like control the narrative. Same with the BBC. I don't think MI6 is filled with geniuses either, and neither do I believe that in the marketing teams of fossil fuel companies. Like, this is just the result of all of these systems of power kind of colluding over time, and now we're here, and everyone's just on the treadmill, going on and on and on and on and on. And most people do not think that they are doing a bad thing. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't still be doing that thing. Most people are doing what they think is best, even if objectively it's a really, really terrible thing to do. But they're surrounded by, yes men or institutions that will continue to reward them for that work, and sort of entrenched in these old imperial beliefs of like progress is one way only and we're heading that way. And so I think that we're also going to have to kind of figure out how to make room to invite other people into this space in a way that isn't accusatory, in a way that isn't particularly judgmental. They probably also won't like it if we call them incompetent. That's, my word. But we are going to have to figure out a manner of finding enough common ground so that we can start to build and get away from this kind of intellectual or emotional purity. And I mean that as well with regards to like our analyses. I mean, everyone here, I assume in the audience, is like very invested in our earth and also our systems of politics that we build out from here. But I'm sure you've also all been in rooms or conversations where if you kind of say the wrong thing, or if your analysis is slightly out of date, or if you just disagree, then that actually creates a really uncomfortable situation. So if we're not even managing to do it together, how do we expect other people to come in? How do we expect to create open doors that folks can walk through? Because at the end of the day, this is a numbers game, right? And so I think with regards to like building out new media, building out new politics, we're definitely going to have to try and take people more where they are, because I do not think that the planet is in this situation, that we're in this situation because 98% of people are like abject moral failures. We just are. And so accepting the reality is also trying to figure out how can we accept people in as well in a way that makes them feel welcome and excited and willing. Because I think that, I do think that our time of sort of throwing stones, I have to say, is sort of coming to an end. And I've certainly tried to sort of approach that in my work over the past year of trying to, how do I put this, be a lot more humble with regards to the things that I'm saying and be a lot more interested in why is it that people think that the British state, for example, the British state intervention is probably a good thing. Why is it that people think that, the Middle East is just a sort of deserted place filled with either autocrats or, enslaved folk? Why is it that people think either that China is the worst thing to ever happen to the planet or the best, And so I know that's not really about media exactly, but Robin, my work is pretty broad, and I'm mostly interested now in like, how is it that we talk to people? And I think with regards to, our institutions going forward, I do think that, certain papers will catch up. And I do think that there has to be space for them in the conversation, because they're always just going to reach a wider audience in these next 5, 10, 15 years, however long it does create to build a new alternative media ecosystem. The old bastions, the old guard will still be there. And what is our strategy for reaching them? Is it having, one-on-one conversations with journalists who may also feel slightly disaffected by their inability to report on certain things? Is it doing, I think a lot of it is doing like, the work that Matt is doing by highlighting the stories that are not only happening, but the stories that are not only being reported on. I certainly feel a very similar like disgust towards our mainstream media institutions, but I'm trying very hard to not let that translate into disgust for individuals, because I think that's a very, very different thing. Most individuals in these institutions are not acting individually because they simply cannot. And that's just the nature of these institutions being 100, 200, however many 100 years old. And so is there a way that we can reach the disaffected? And is there a way that we can lead by example for the stories that matter? And I'm afraid that's where I am right now. Sorry. I'll just stop, actually. That's good. I'll mute myself.
Yeah, Porter decided that's the end. Thank you so much, Rachel. Ticking people in the chat saying ticking so many boxes of great points. I really like this on about the dialogue in particular. This is something I really focus on a lot in social movement organizing. We had it earlier in some of the events about assemblies. How do we bring people together to have these conversations? Because I agree, many people think they're doing the right thing or want to believe that that's the thing. They've been, the zone has been flooded with shit. And so a lot of the view has been distorted. But when we get together, in community spaces, in town halls, like Chris Hedges mentioned at the beginning, I see a very big shift in people's perceptions in what they want to do and act on. We saw with citizens' assemblies when they happen nationally that people's attitudes become 10% on average more progressive because they get to empathize and connect with people from a very different background from their own, often for the first time, and really understand that. And we also had a great space earlier with the authors of the All In book, A Revolutionary Change, and Kofi Klou, who's been working on a lot of international solidarity about how we, take these ideas, these suppressed books like Matt, to the global majority, going into Kofi's from Ghana, going to those communities and talking about these things, spreading the word across and building that kind of global majority people power. Roger and I have been very focused on the micro design of organizing sociability, community oriented spaces. How do people feel welcomed? How do they, feel a part of something? And in those spaces, having a chance to actually talk and not being, atomized into these little silos. And just, a lot of what you're saying really resonates with me there. And I wanted to come back to you, Matt, about, this kind of, telling the truth. It's one of our key principles in the movement, telling the truth to the public, organizing social movements in this moment.
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd say that I agree with that. Sorry, I agree with a lot of what Rachel was saying. I mean, I don't believe that. I don't have a take on. There's different individuals working in all sorts of institutions, including Shell and BP. Not everyone is evil, but we're talking about structurally how our society has been built and what you can do within those institutions. And there's many good journalists at The Guardian, for example, but structurally, they're hamstrung by the fact that their paper is a corporate establishment newspaper. And I also agree that my take on that is not that we need to then work on changing those institutions to make them do better journalism. I don't think that's possible, really, structurally. What I think we need to do is build. Like you're right. People just want to. Also, people want to live a normal life, right? You leave university, you want to get a mortgage, you want to have kids, and what we need to do is build an alternative media that has that kind of infrastructure, and that will change the game completely. Because there's this famous quote by Upton Sinclair. He said it's very difficult to make a man understand something when his wage depends on him not understanding it. And that's effectively how it works. Like if you work within an institution, if you're the CEO of BP, it's unlikely you're going to become a supporter of Extinction Rebellion, and not because you're irrational. It's because your whole life would be upended if you believe something different. And that everyone working within these establishments, institutions is like that. So what we need to do. Many young journalists leave journalism school or leave university or don't even leave university, just go into journalism, and they're idealistic. They believe what you're told in journalism school. And I went to journalism school and you're told all the right things. You're said we're a check on power, we expose wrongdoing, we expose lies by corporate and state. And people come out with that idealism, and then that idealism gets smashed when they enter those institutions. And it happened to me. I worked for the Financial Times for 3 years when I left journalism school. And again, there were many nice people at the Financial Times and many good journalists. And actually, the FT, I still think is is the best of the papers. But unless you have a critical analysis of society and the way the world works, when you go in, you'll instantly just be subsumed into the institutional thinking, which is that we have to live in a corporate-run society. The World Bank and the IMF is about development and economic stability. All the myths. The myths are a prerequisite to not only entering those institutions but staying in those institutions. So what we need to do is create an alternative media infrastructure which has the resources where someone can leave journalism school and go straight into an alternative media institution, continue doing the work which exposes state and corporate power, and get a decent wage and have a pension or whatever it is. I know it sounds like obscure stuff, but this is important. And then once we do that, I think that's the game changer. Because now, even though, as I was saying, it is optimistic about the alternative media, it's still messy. There's no real no funding model that's really. There's obviously like subscribers, foundations. There's a mix, and there's also corporate money that goes into alternative media. That's another thing that people should be aware of as well. It's not just the mainstream media that's targeted by these interests. It's also alternative media because it's a threat, so they want to capture that too. But I think it's possible. And as I say, I think this moment is more opportune than ever to move forward on this. And I think I'll finish with this. I think the big game changer, and I think this is important that we talk about in all these spaces, is that when you talk about the two big power centers, which I mentioned, which run society, which is a state and a corporation, the only one that has the people power, the money, and the force to really take those on is the unions, trade unions, collective labor. And at the moment, they've been captured in. Just to talk about the UK, for example, they've been captured by the establishment. So the trade unions, most of them, some of them not anymore, but most of them fund the Labour Party, while the Labour Party is hammering disabled people, while the Labour Party is participating in a genocide in Gaza. That's absurd. That's like turkeys voting for Christmas. So if we could, for example, launch a campaign where we said, look, we got all this independent, these resources which are independent of corporate and state power, if we can unhinge them from the Labour Party and put them into, I don't know, Extinction Rebellion or some extra parliamentary thing, maybe a new party, I don't know what it is. But if we could unhinge those resources, that would be a game changer. Then we could have the resources to pay people, young journalists, a proper wage to do alternative media. And I think that we need to, any strategy we have needs to include the power of unions and the fact that unions are the one possibility for independent money. At the moment, as I said, they're captured largely, and you see this around the world as well, but they don't have to be. So it's important when people say join a union, obviously I agree with that, but more important than that is join a union and make it democratic and make it responsive to workers' needs rather than the corporation's needs or the state's needs. So but yeah, all these conversations are happening. Did I answer your question? Sorry.
That's all right, man. You hit it. I think this is I want to tie it in basically, which is like, yes, we need to empower alternative media will thrive combined with community organizing. With these both, a lot of the people who are on the call right now, from Roger and I community are in the kind of community organizing, Extinction Rebellion sphere of things. We need to champion alternative media structures. We're going to thrive together as the people power coming together.
Can I mention something on that?
Yeah, please.
There's a very good example of this called the Bristol Cable. I don't know if people are aware of this, but they're not separate, those two things. The Bristol Cable is a community organization and an independent media organization, and they launched it like that. And actually talking to their journalists is interesting because their idea was that we don't, if you have journalists, there's this long history of like the white savior type journalism where some newspaper will send a reporter into a poor community or a foreign country and they'll report on them. They were like, look, the people who know their communities best are the people who live in them. So they were like, why don't we train up people within communities in Bristol to write articles about what they're seeing? And they did, and it's been very successful. And they're subscriber-based models. So I agree. I think that the two things are totally linked. And as you said, when you empower people, because many people have never been approached by anyone to say, look, you can write about what you want to, about your own community. That's a foreign idea. So then they become part of it. And this is like one of the major things I learned from Marxism is like, this idea of alienation where if you're alienated from your work, then it's hard to feel any value as a human being. So even if you do a bad job, if you are involved in a decision-making process around that industry or around your company, then it doesn't matter. Like if you work in a factory and you're just doing some boring mechanical thing, yes, that's awful. But if you're on the board and you're making decisions about where the company goes, what products the company's making, which is all possible, then it's a totally different way of being. So we need to understand that there's no top. This is another thing with the left. There's no top brass that can tell you what to do. Like everything needs to be collective decision making, and we're all learning, we're all strategizing together, and no one has the answer. And today is a good example of that.
Thanks, Matt. Rachel, I'd love to hear from you too. How do we, get this alternative media, social movement, community organizing thriving together? How do you see it playing out? You've been so supportive with XR and Gail and others. Yeah, how do you see it thriving?
I think that I just want to say I think Extinction Rebellion has done absolutely brilliant work, and I'm always amazed at the amount of like intellectual rigor that is going in the background, like the papers that are being written, the research strategies that are being deployed. Like it's a phenomenally academic thing as well that is being done. It's not just a bunch of people over a pint being like, "Oh, what if we try this and see what happens?" It's so well researched, and that's actually a story that I think needs to get out in the press. That it's not just people putting their bodies on the line or blocking traffic. Like the amount of thought that goes into this is astonishing, and that's because there's so many people working on it. And I think that's what makes it brilliant. It's diversity. I do want to flag something though. I do want to flag something about the nature of travel. And it's actually connected to REV21 and to Roger's recent campaigns. I am slightly concerned that with the rise of like the authoritarian daddy figure around the world on the right, that the left is kind of now really grasping for its MLK, its Gandhi, its singular leader. And I have been a little bit concerned with like the branding of REV21 to be so heavily based around Roger as an individual figure, because I don't actually think that that is where our success will lie. And I think that it falls into a kind of old pattern of campaigning in which things actually weren't that systemic and they didn't have to be so big picture that one person could encapsulate a message. And I just don't think that that's the case now. And I think also we have the research from movement building that we know it has to be diverse. There shouldn't just be one leader. There has to be many people that other folks could look to, and also ensure that that collective decision making is always sort of at the forefront. And so I just kind of want to put that out there to the audience and to everyone. It's something I've been thinking about in the run up to this conversation, like how to bring that up. And I know we're kind of reaching the end, so sort of bringing it up and throwing it out and just leaving it out there. But I just want that to percolate, because I think that we should be very wary of trying to make martyrs in a movement that absolutely impacts everyone. Perhaps not equally, but it does impact everyone. And especially when the movement of climate justice, for example, is connected to genocide, and it is connected to economic insecurity and just a huge amount of violence all over the world. I don't think it should be given any one person's face or name, because it's all of us all the time. And I think with regards to the lessons that we have learned about certain, corporate media institutions' ability to tear down the single figure. I mean, look what they managed to do with Corbyn, who just talked good sense all the time. That was all he did. He just made sense, and they still managed to find a way to tear him down. I think we should be very wary of putting so much attention on a single person to be a leader, when the point of this is that we all need to step up and we all need to be leading in our own communities. As Matt said, there is no top brass. This is not going to be a top-down thing. I imagine the future is going to be a very bottom-up, decentralized, kind of fractured, as human society moves through not having access to global resources and tries to figure out what to do. I hope that is where the media will continue to go in that direction as well. But it also speaks to our movements. We are going to have to be investing in lots and lots and lots of leaders in each locale, in each territoria, which is a Colombian concept I learned when I was out there working with these marginalized communities who are responding to the terroricide, to the poly crisis. Everything that they do is linked into where they are, to their land. And it's through their land that they have their history and their language and the little systems that they have built themselves in order to just survive and thrive over the past few years. And so when we have these sort of disembodied figures that become representative of a concept rather than connected into where they are and having real relationships with people, then it's very easy in this world that we have of like such corporate control to tear them down. And so I think that has to be really important as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You're getting so much love right now in the reactions, in the chat. Everyone is fully aligned with you on that one. We wouldn't invite Planet Critical along without, getting our own share of criticism. That's what we respect so much in what you bring. Thank you for naming that. Yes, exactly. It's building a leaderful movement. That's the phrase we use in Extinction Rebellion. When I I was part of the DNA team, teaching the story, strategy, and structure to people across the country. It's how do we create a leaderful movement? And I'll just give a shout out now as we're on this and put it in the chat. Resilient Uprising is our kind of spin-off, focusing on trainings, building up a leaderful movement. We've got some of the Serbian revolutionaries right now teaching on how they've built this kind of moment of whirlwind. Paul Engler, many other theorists coming together over the year, and we'd love people to be involved, coming along, skilling up together. We've got the A22 network, which is our kind of the grouping around Just Stop Oil and Last Generation and many other groups across the world, hosting a women's leadership training next month in Vienna. All of these are so important for us skilling up and building that together. So thank you for calling that out. I'll pop a note through to the media team. Fewer pictures of Roger, but yeah, he's a useful catalyst, I think, for us building a small platform, getting a few conversations, provocations with the people he knows, and we need to go a lot wider than that. We have 5 minutes left. People have really enjoyed this conversation. I wondered if you guys have any closing thoughts. I'll go to you, Matt, first on this, on how we go forward from here.
Well, a lot has been said. Basically, we have a historic duty now. That's what I feel. I'm reading a book about the Third Reich, the rise of the Third Reich, written by an American journalist who was there in the 1930s. And of course, I'm not saying we're going to get a Hitler figure, but the conditions that he describes that Hitler thrived in and the Nazis thrived in are very, very similar. It's quite unnerving reading that book in the world we're in. So if we don't organize now and strategize about a way to stop the kind of corporate fascism that we're seeing, and it is fascism, then we're betraying the future generations. Because the other thing about this book by William Shirer is it's quite clear when he talks about it that it wasn't inevitable that Hitler would get into power. There were mistakes made by the left. There were organizational problems. There were strategic mistakes made. And obviously, we know what the result of those were. So I feel like if we got Trump in the White House, you've got reform, which are pretty much certain, it looks like from the polling, to form the next government in the UK. You got fascism sweeping Europe. We have to fight now, and we have to fight cleverly, and we have to build collective spaces. I would say that I don't wholly agree with Rachel. I can say that because she said she didn't agree with me, so that's all right. But I don't wholly agree with Rachel's analysis of I agree that we need collective decision-making in democratic systems in opposition, but I do feel like it's not wrong to have figures that we can coalesce around, because I feel like that's needed. Unfortunately, it goes against my instincts, obviously, but even if you look at Latin America, where I've spent a lot of time with the successful social movements that have got into power, like Bolivia under Evo Morales, who was propelled by, he was kind of a unique figure, and he was vital to coalesce all those collective forces around. And the fact that he was a genuine liberation leader and took on the empire and the corporations made it happen, I think. I mean, the conditions were there. The same with Hitler. Like, even in this book, William Shirer says, look, he was such a unique figure, uniquely evil, obviously, but he was a genius figure and strategist and all these. If Hitler hadn't been around, it might not have happened as well. So I think that we need to understand that it's obviously a collective thing, but I don't think we should shy away from looking for leaders to coalesce around who are responsive to the movement. Like in the case of Evo Morales, when I was in Bolivia, they'd put up graffiti on the walls, and even under Evo, the social movements would write, "The government obeys the people." And if he did something that was against what they said, well, there was this road called Tipnis, which was going to go through, which was a really bad idea, but it was going to go through all these indigenous lands. And there was mass protests against him and his government, and they eventually stopped it. So I think we need a combination of that. We need democratic social movements, but I think we also can have figureheads and people that are reactive to those movements to lead the movement. I think that's okay. Like Roger Roger is a heroic figure. I mean, he's in prison now for all of us, you know, and for the planet. So, yeah, I'll just finish with that.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, you're right. It's creating a balance, isn't it? I think, you know, it's something between what we're saying. I mean, more women leaders, I think, would be really welcome in this space as well. I think how we champion that, people are saying in the chat, how we elect people into those positions rather than just self-selecting. These are all things for us to work on. And being strategic in this moment on these questions, as you say, is so crucial if we're going to beat back that fascism. And that's why I'm, yeah, honored, as you said, this is a very important moment in history. And I feel like I'm with some very strategic minds right now. Rachel, I'd like to give you the final word before we move on to the next sessions.
I think that with what I understand about where we're going and also the amount of energy and materials that it takes to actually build a state and run a state and grow a state, because states, things are never just in stasis. There needs to be this cycle of growth and degrowth, for example. And I certainly hope that we could see that in the future. But I do think that our world order of these huge institutions, big states, big governments, big corporations, I think that is coming to an end. I think quite simply, we do not have the resource of supply to maintain the huge amount of growth that we have, whether it's fossil fuels drying up around the world, whether it's the fact that, you know, as Simon Michel's work and other scientists pointing out, that the minerals that we require for an energy transition are either unavailable or they're going to trigger a huge biodiversity crisis. I just don't see a way in which the left grabs power in all of this, simply because I don't think there's going to be that power to be grabbed. And that's why I think working more from the bottom, from communities, trying to make themselves more resilient, trying to have the systems in place of mutual aid and their own food and their own sovereignty and their own local politics for when, as things continue to erode, so that they're not continually forced into an enclosure, essentially, of their rights or of their freedoms or of their purposes, but rather they have just enough wiggle room to keep pushing back and hopefully link up with one another. And so I think that's why the work needs to be connected to territoria, to the land, because I genuinely think with the resource shortage that is coming, that is going to be the state of play. And so how we resist it depends on how well connected we are to each other on the ground.
Beautiful. Thank you. What a note to end on. Thank you everyone so much for joining. 115 of you here in this live Zoom, the thousands that will be watching this recording afterwards. It's such a pleasure to be working on these big ideas with you. Next up, we have two sessions, one with Jeremy Lent, the author of The Patterning Instinct and other books, giving a talk about how we can build a life-affirming civilization in this next steps, will hopefully give us a good positivity boost. And also we have a session with Ben Mango talking about our own personal stories and how we can connect across many different backgrounds, and telling our stories as a way of uniting in this moment. Thank you all so much for joining. Take care.
Thank you, Alvin.
Ciao.